Welcome back to the Keep It Or CHANGECARS podcast. And today I am with two guests, Greg Dennis and Mr. Alan Rosenmeyer. They are very familiar with the people that are actually funding and that bring this episode for you guys. This is proudly brought to you by CHANGECARS and All Things Monitoring. And today, actually, one of them is Mr. Alan Rosenmeyer, and he's wearing a jacket that's written CHANGECARS. So you're very familiar with CHANGECARS. How are you, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely great. Thanks, Nikki. And part of the CHANGECARS team, as far as I'm concerned, which we all are. So it's wonderful. Yeah.
We all are.
Yeah.
And next to Alan Rosenmeyer, I have Mr. Gregory Dennis. He doesn't like it when I call him Gregory. He wants Greg, but I want to call you Gregory. How are you, Gregory
I'm
Dennis?
doing very good, thank you. And I've told you before, it's only Gregory if I'm in trouble.
So I guess you're in trouble all the time with me.
Seems like it.
So
was that the way your mother?
Well, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, when I grew up, it was always if I heard Gregory, then I knew that I needed to hide away or I did something wrong. So
I think we might need to invite your mother or something just to
Okay.
get the background of how you are. But today's episode is not about Greg. It is actually about Greg and Alan, but of their prized possessions. But we're also going to speak about things that are very important in the South African market, things like the Chinese as well. You guys like knowing about the Chinese. There's a new Chinese manufacturer coming into the country as well, Gac Motor. We're going to speak about that, speak about the Chinese versus the Koreans and Japanese. And when I speak about Koreans and Japanese, I mean Kia, Hyundai, Toyota and Mazda and the likes. Then we're also going to speak about Volkswagen and Suzuki, why they keep challenging for the second spot, and why VW is actually moving down the ranks. And we're going to speak about it a bit more. But I'm going to keep you guys on hold for that because I want us to focus at moving on to the step by step. But obviously, we're starting off with the Chinese vehicles. What are your thoughts about literally every single month or every second month or every quarter, there's a new Chinese brand, a new vehicle being launched? What are your thoughts about it, Greg? Let's start with you.
the Chinese takeover is what I'm calling it because, like you've said, every month, every quarter, there's something new coming to South Africa, a new brand. We have to learn how to pronounce all of that stuff that comes with it. So I'm actually for it. For me, it's all about affordability and making it possible for people to get into new cars these days because over the past decade, I think it's been very difficult with the way that the price of cars have increased. For someone to get into a new car has been almost impossible. But it's looking a little bit more likely, and as you can see by the sales numbers every month, the Chinese are slowly gaining a spot. Obviously, more people are buying new cars. But with that comes its challenges. Yes, some people are opposed to it because of parts availability, service, and things like that, which the brands are promising us are getting better and getting better. They're showing us the warehouses, they're showing us all the parts and the millions of parts sitting, waiting for people. So, yes, there's lots of new cars coming, and yes, people are a little bit afraid to get into them because of those reasons, but the brands are promising only positive things from them.
And for you, Alan, what's your thoughts about it?
Well, look, I term it the Chinese onslaught. Okay. But now I'm going to go back a bit, show my age slightly. When Toyota and Datsun in those days arrived in South Africa in the mid-1960s, they were referred to as Jap, and I'm not going to use the next word, okay?
Okay.
It took them 20 plus years to really establish themselves in the South African market and to be accepted. When the Koreans arrived in the 1990s, they arrived, same thing, they came price way under. They priced them really competitively, and they not took over the market, but they established themselves really well, starting with price. But instead of taking 20 plus years to establish, it took them 10. And when the first Chinese cars arrived, and the first mainstream was Haval
Yes.
in 2017, 18, somewhere there, okay? I said, watch. 20 years, 10 years, they'll do it in 5. I think it's been proven. So the early Chinese cars, I'm sorry, were rubbish. There were a lot of them that really came in. They weren't the right quality. There weren't parts backups. There weren't things like that. But what has changed, and the big thing, and I'm going to use the example of the second coming of Chery, for example. When they first came, it was a distributorship, which has its own challenges. Then they came back as the manufacturer. So they came back to South Africa backed by Chery in China, not coming through as a distributorship of a local group or whatever. And there's a massive difference. Obviously, there's so much more money behind them now. And they're proving themselves. They are, day by day, as you say, there's new arrivals.
100%.
the cars are proving themselves. They've now got, the early arrivals have got 5 years. And I don't think we can find too much fault with the quality anymore.
Yeah. So essentially, what do you guys think needs to be done? Well, putting the Chinese aside, looking
Yeah.
at like the Koreans and the Japanese, for them to get back that market that the Chinese have taken. Obviously, we can't say price because the SUVs that
Yeah.
compete with the likes of your Haval H6 Jolions and so many other ones, the Koreans and Japanese are priced correctly right there, but people are still opting to go for the Chinese. What do you think they have to do to get back that market? Because they can't use price because price is at the same point, but the vehicles aren't.
I think, for example, and I'll use Hyundai as the example,
Yes.
they have moved up in price, yes, but they're still offering more spec for the money than, and I'm going to say the Japanese brand, okay, like Toyota. And I'm just using examples here, where you still, if you actually take the value spec-wise, if you had to spec the two identically, the Hyundai, for example, is still significantly cheaper than Toyota on a fairly equivalent car. And the only thing they can do is actually start adding spec without upping the price necessarily. Now, economies of scale are a big thing. When ABS braking came in, I mean, Mercedes and BMW, it was the S-Class and the 7 Series. They were the first cars that had ABS braking. Now, I don't think you can get a car without ABS anymore. Because as technology becomes more common, more popular, as it's produced in bigger numbers, the cost comes down. So they can add it to the car without any big deal.
So essentially, you're saying that the vehicle, the manufacturer should look at adding more specs, but keeping the price at the same point to get attraction from the buyers, essentially.
Exactly. Because at the moment, what you're doing is also, the Chinese brands are brilliant at the bling, if I can call it that. They are loading the spec, and I'm using the term bling because a lot of it is the blingy, fancy, whatever.
The bells and whistles.
Yes.
Yeah, and the bings and bongs that can drive you mad. Yeah. A lot of it's not necessary, but it's nice.
Gets the
And-
customers.
Yeah, and customers like it, and it just looks good. It's in your face, a lot of it. So you get into one of their cars, and it's wow, and you get into a Japanese, let's just use Toyota,
Toyota,
and it's like, it's a bit boring, compared.
Because
Yeah.
essentially, Greg, what do you think? Because you had the J-Crew on test as well. So, and you've had a CX-5 on test, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially, a CX-5 and a J-Crew is the same competition because size-wise, they're the exact same. But from a consumer and a buyer point of view, you put the vehicles, take the brands out of the picture. That there's a J-Crew, that's a Mazda. Just put the vehicles without the badges or anything. People are more to lean. They're gonna lean more to the J-Crew because of what Ellen just spoke about.
Yeah.
The bells and whistles, the
Yeah.
big screen inside inside the vehicle. So, what do you think attracts people aside from such features in a vehicle? Because I believe there's more to a vehicle than the fancy things.
There is a lot to a vehicle than just the fancy things, and I think people it's perceived value for money at the end of the day. Now, if you had to look at the JQ and a Mazda side by side without their badges, I think you'll definitely see a difference in build quality. I mean, if you want to get hands on with the two cars, you'll definitely feel a difference. The Chinese are going to be a lot more plasticky, sound a lot more hollow, but then again, they're throwing in all of the spec and fancy equipment to make up for that stuff. Because when people get into a car, they want to see what's shining, what does this look like, what's glossy, what screen is this, what does that do? And you're not going to get that from the Mazdas. I mean, the Mazdas now don't even have touchscreens.
Yeah.
But every
Yeah.
screen inside of a Chinese car is a touchscreen.
And I
Which-
noticed something
Yeah.
when I was on TikTok that, well, we are car reviewers and motion journalists, as Alan over here. And there's certain things that we don't cover because we are used to it in a vehicle. Things like talking to a vehicle. Like
Yeah.
we've been cars that talk to us. I'm sure we've had over 10 cars that we can talk to. But because we're so used to it, we don't really cover it at times. We focus on the other things. Whereas on TikTok, when a buyer gets a Cherry, for example, and I use a Cherry because I saw a guy that had a Cherry Tiggo 8, and he kept speaking about how he loves the features of the fact that he can speak to the car, then the car opens the sunroof for itself. So I think that's also what leads to consumers opting for that vehicle over ones
The
that
gimmicks.
don't, the
Look,
gimmicks.
Yeah, the gimmicks count. But just for example, there's a other side to that. And I'm going to use the brand here. Why not?
Yeah.
Is Mercedes.
Yeah.
The Hey Mercedes feature. Now, I refer to that as the dreaded M word. Because when I'm doing my video in the car,
How
for
often do
example,
you say the word?
and I say the dreaded M word, and I get this, how can I help you, voice interrupting my video, which I don't want, because it's picking that up.
Yes, that's
You wanted to respond when you wanted to, not so programmed. But that's just one of the sort of silly little things. But
And I think looking at, well, as consumers, they tend not to look at the future, like 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line. And as manufacturers, like if you look at a Toyota, Toyota is not looking at pleasing you right now within the first year of ownership. They're looking at pleasing you 5 years down the line, because 5 years down the line, your car won't have a problem. And I'm not saying that the Chinese vehicles will have a problem, but we all have cell phones. Cell phones,
Yeah.
within 2-3 years, you want to change it. And how these Chinese vehicles, a lot of them feel like phones inside because of the technology. Yes, we're moving on. In the 21st century, we need all the technology. But my question comes to, especially like a JQ, where everything is within the touchscreen infotainment system. Don't you guys think 3 years, 5 years down the line, something could go wrong with the touchscreen infotainment system? How much would that cost to repair? And let's just say you're out of motor plan. So don't you think, even the smallest of things, don't you think that could be a problem? And
I hate the fact, for example, your aircon controls are in the touch screen only. Because, first of all, and there's something that, and I'm going to speak for myself here, because that a lot of people don't think of, is your size. Greg, you're a lot taller than me, right? Nikki, you kind of in between.
yes,
I've had occasions where, for example, when my seat is set perfectly for myself, the touch screen is actually a big stretch. And it's not comfortable for me to keep programming on the touch screen. So in a car like that, and I'm not going to name, but there have been a couple of examples where, for example, it's awkward for me to change the aircon settings because not just an easy reach. Whereas if there are buttons somewhere on the center fascia, it's a nice, easy, quick reach. Now it's awkward. Now, that's where it comes into choosing the right car for yourself, because some are better than others in that respect. But it's something that just stands out to me. But also, can I just point out one thing you haven't mentioned
Yes.
in talking 3 years, 5 years down the line, is resale value.
yes, there's that too.
Okay, your trade-in or resale value, where, barring Haval, who've had the longest period, none of the Chinese brands have totally proven themselves yet on resale value.
Including Haval, because I remember when I tested the Haval 86 hybrid in 2022. It was launched in 2022, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds about right, yeah?
And then last year I saw, and when I tested it, I think it was 650, somewhere around there, 650, 670. And then a year of ownership of the vehicle, someone sold the vehicle, and I was seeing the vehicle being advertised going for less than 500,000 rand. Which
It's a big knock.
It's a
Yeah,
big, within
yeah.
1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, look, you should look at 20% in your first year on most brands. So it's slightly worse than average then.
Yeah, so imagine if Haval is, when you go to a person and like name one Chinese manufacturer, they're gonna name Haval
Yeah.
because they're the one that established the whole Chinese manufacturers into the country. So imagine if Haval could take such a knock on such a vehicle. What about the ones that are coming in the year 2023, 2024 now? Imagine in 2025, 2026, where would the resale value be? And that's a good point that you raised. And I think that's a point where consumers and buyers need to think about when they buy in the vehicle, because you need to look at resale value, because not everyone wants to keep a car for 5
Well,
10 years.
especially the guy who changes his car every 3 to 4 years. Okay?
Yes.
And I'm looking specifically, and that's a big portion of the market. Now you've got where suddenly you've got a shortfall on your settlement. And then you load
On
your finance.
on
And that has got to be the biggest trap that has ever existed for anybody in their financial life, is where you buy a car, now 3 years down the line you want to change it, and you've got a shortfall of, let's say, 50,000 Rand, okay? Which, because especially when you're financing now over 72 months and even 84 months, that's a long time. So 3 years,
long.
you aren't on break even yet. no deposit, etc., right? So you now have this shortfall. So now you buy your next car and you load an extra 50,000 onto it, onto the finance already, and in 3 years you want to change it again. You get, by the second or third time you do this, you got to buy a 600,000 rand car with 750,000 rand finance.
Yeah, and that's actually.
I was going to say, and don't forget about the people that have taken balloons as well.
Don't
So-
start me on that one, please.
so
don't go there.
We've banned the
Yeah.
the residual and balloon payment.
Not
on the-
recommended.
on this podcast.
Yeah.
We've spoken about it in length. So if you want to know about balloon payment, Michael Pashut actually spoke very well about that, and people actually got to understand.
I watched
what
that
is-
episode.
What is balloon payment? What is
Yeah.
residual? All that stuff. So please go. I'll put the link in the description box below. Please go watch that podcast. But just we're about to move on from the Chinese. Just one more thing. Now in August, another Chinese manufacturer is coming to the country, Gac Motor. And well, off the invitation that I received, it looks like they're bringing in an SUV. Just can't pinpoint where, in terms of size, where it's going to fit. Because
It looks smallish.
It looks small.
It looks smallish. Maybe a little bit smaller than a Jolian.
I think they're going to be bringing a range, quite honestly. It's not just one vehicle. From what I understand, GSE are coming in with, however you pronounce it, because these are the other discussion we can go into for ages. But I think it's going to be quite an extensive range.
Because I saw on their website, well, globally,
Yeah.
that they have a very extensive range. They have
Yeah.
a very huge, lovely SUV that I saw as well. And then, interestingly, they have sedans as well. So
Right.
my question to myself was, do you think, especially Alan and Greg, do you guys think that maybe later on in the year or even next year they'll bring a sedan, considering how the sedan market in South Africa has fallen off, where everything is just SUVs now?
Look, I like sedans, by the way. Especially now, and I don't know which sedan you're referring to, but that bottom end sedan, can I call it that?
Yeah.
Your Suzuki Desire, your Kia
Pegasus.
Pegasus,
Yes.
Your Uber sedans.
the Uber sedans.
Yes.
Good one. There is a market for them. There is still room for maybe another one. It's all going to be based on price, obviously. So let's see. There is a little niche still available there. So why, if they're going to bring an extensive range in, then why not?
Then do you think, though, as you're saying, an extensive range, do you think that they'll bring a higher end sedan to compete with like the C-Class and the BMW 3 Series?
That'll be tough to
Well,
convince people.
Yeah. At that end, are you going to convince anybody?
That's another question that
Yeah.
needs
But
to be
you
asked.
do know that we're about to have our first million plus Chinese vehicle.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I
Now
don't
in
know if I don't know if I should say anything yet or
No,
not.
We can actually, because
Yeah.
that is the next point
Yeah.
we're going into.
Okay.
We can actually touch on that.
The Tank 500.
Yeah.
Tank 500.
Yeah.
And,
1.2 million for the top spec version.
and how much do you think the bulky version will be? I think it's the P500, if I'm mistaken.
I've
Bulk.
seen numbers of 995 for the top hybrid version. Yeah. Very interesting.
So those are our first Chinese cars to break through 1 million, right?
Correct, yeah.
And considering how when they first said we're going to bring the Tank 300, we're going to bring the Tank 500, majority, including myself, I thought that even the Tank 500 won't touch 1 million rand.
Sub, yeah.
But seeing the Tank 300, just I think what top of the range is
851.
851.
Yeah.
Seeing that, and I couldn't just wrap my head around that the Tank 500 will be under 1 million rand, and clearly it's not. It's 1.2 million rand. And
Yeah.
at that price point, do you guys think it'll do well? Considering, one, the Prado, the newly launched Toyota
Yeah.
Prado starts at 1.4, right? 1.4 off the top of my head.
But what you've got to, sorry, can I just,
Yes.
what you've got to understand here again is you've got to take spec for spec now. That Tank 500, the top spec, when is this going out?
Anytime.
Okay, I've got to be very careful here.
We can touch on it, yeah.
Yeah. That Tank 500 is spec'd, the upper model, like you cannot believe. So what I'm saying to you is it's actually not the entry Prado, it's the top Prado, which is 1.5, 1.6. It's touching on LC300. Starts at 1.8. So at 1.2, it's actually could be a bargain.
But do you think, well, obviously because we do this for a living,
Yeah.
we inside cars, we know spec for spec. Do you think people are going to look at it the way you are saying it, whereas a top spec Tank 500 is 1.2, a top spec for spec is 1.6, 1.7. Do you think people are going to look at it like that, or going to be like, okay, Tank 500 there, Toyota Prado there, I'm going to go for a Prado, without even considering the fact that this tank has that, and also diesel engine as well?
Now, look, a diesel would be wonderful, and they are talking about a diesel, you know that.
Okay.
That's good.
They have got a 2.4 diesel available. I'm not sure now, you're catching me a bit off guard, whether I think there may be a Tank 500 coming with that engine.
With that engine, okay.
A P500.
P500.
So if they can drop that diesel engine into the tanks, that will make the difference.
Yes.
I remember at the launch them showing us the different engines that
Correct,
are available within the group. Yeah.
That's it, yeah. And there is definitely a 2.4 diesel, which we haven't seen here yet.
Okay.
So that is a big thing. But you've got to, the other thing is you've got to just, their challenge is going to be getting people to get into that vehicle.
That's true.
And I'll tell you now, if they get people into that vehicle, I think you may be surprised.
Greg, with you, looking at how saturated the bakkie market is, and there's also been so many bakkies from Chinese that have been launched in the past couple of months as well. Looking at the P500, we're looking at, as Alan just said, just under a million. So let's just say R1 million. You're playing around Ford Ranger, All-Track, Ford Ranger, Platinum. You're playing around the Hilux as well, the GRS and all of those things. Do you think that someone that's looking at buying a Ford, a Toyota, will consider the P500, in your personal opinion?
I do. I mean, if you look at, and I say the success of the P series, I mean, you see P series everywhere, and I don't think that's necessarily stopped people more than convinced them to get one, because they're seeing a lot of them. And that P500, if I remember correctly, was actually substantially bigger.
Yes.
It's much bigger.
Than the P. It's almost like Ford F-150 sizing, which is something we don't have in South Africa. So from a road presence point of view, I think it's going to stand out like nothing else.
And then engines come with the hybrid.
Okay, I was going to say, there are two things about that.
Yeah.
It's coming with a hybrid. Now, I had a big discussion with him at the Tank 300 launch as to, there's no standard of taking a petrol engine at so many kilowatts and a electric at so many, and what formula you use to add the two together. I mean, Suzuki, for example, don't add anything on the Grand Vitara, right? What GWM have done with the tanks is they basically have taken the two numbers and added them together in full. Whereas some others add like a third. I don't know what the formulas are, but everybody is different. So 255 kilowatts and 640 odd Newton meters, maybe not, okay, in compared to some other brands. But even if it was 200 kilowatts, okay?
Yeah.
Second to the Raptor, that's the most powerful bakkie we're going to have on the South African road. I leave the Raptor out. But also, if you take spec for spec, you're actually looking at Ranger Platinum, for example, which is about 1.15.
Yes, 1.15.
So you're looking at a good 150 to 200,000 less than a Ranger Platinum. You know, otherwise, you're not getting the same spec level. So again, it's this mindset and this psychological barrier of $1 million. I mean, 995 or $1 million doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whereas with the established guys, can I call it that?
Yes.
You're still getting that 20% discount in actual money you're going to lay out. I think we're looking for an interesting couple of months coming up.
I'd love to have you guys back after these launches, after a couple of months.
Dust is settled, we actually look at it.
Just to see how things are going.
I think I'd love to do it, because I think, you know what, we need to give like the first 3 months of sales.
Then come back.
We should book it now to come back.
Yes.
They're launching the P Series mid-August.
Mid-August,
you know that,
yeah, 2 weeks from now.
So
interesting.
Mid-November, we need to have a chat on that.
We'll be back mid-November. I did tell you guys that today's episode is very interesting. But before we do carry on, let's take a word from our sponsors.
Need advice? Visit changecars.co.za and click on the Keep It or Change Cars tab.
And that was a word from our sponsors. And going back to my two guests over here, we're going to speak about Volkswagen and Suzuki, and how Suzuki has overtaken Volkswagen in terms of sales. Because I think the top three has always been Toyota, VW, and Suzuki. But I think a couple of months ago, Suzuki started taking the top spot. Now they're just exchanging each other.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very obvious what the reasoning behind that, and I think you guys know that because some of the Volkswagens that you guys drive are over 400,000 rand. Some of them are over 500,000 rand. So it's obviously because of price. And
Well, if we say price, we can actually move on to the next topic.
That's it.
so I'm speaking about VW and them being under pressure, and I do kind of see them coming back at Suzuki because of what they're going to launch, depending on if they do price it correctly. Looking at like the Polo Vivo, so VW is about to launch a Polo Vivo in August, and looking at how successful the Polo Vivo has been the past couple of years since its inception, it's one of the volume sellers for VW. It's what gets them those numbers. Now,
Yeah.
considering that the new one is coming, do you think, well, we don't know price or anything yet, do you think if they price it correctly, looking at, obviously it's going to come with more specs, it's going to look much better than the outgoing one, do you think a lot more people are going to get into the newer Polo Vivo, depending on how it's priced, instead of jumping to a Polo that's over 400,000 rand, and if you spec it correctly, well, to its brim, you can get it over 500,000 rand.
Look, there are a few things. There is a massive following of VW in South Africa.
Big fan base. Yeah.
I mean, really. So especially when they launch a new one. The first few months, they're going to sell bucket loads of them. I have no doubt whatsoever. It's going to depend on what it looks like, because again, that fan base are very looks conscious.
Yes.
You say the price, even a Polo Vivo, believe me, you can spec it up. Yeah, but there's going to be the list price, and you can spec up a Polo Vivo as well.
Because currently the Polo Vivo GT, if you spec it up, is looking at 350.
350. Yeah.
Top.
Okay,
And
but
that's
now
a lot of money.
it's a lot of money. You mentioned Suzuki, a Swift GLX, which basically you can't spec up. They're very
comes like
few.
that.
What can you add to a Swift GLX? And
can't.
it comes in at, I think, last time I looked, about 260.
Yeah.
So
So I've received comments of people saying when like using the outgoing Polo Vivo, people would be like, I'd rather get into a Suzuki Franks, because Franks is loved by by people here.
Phenomenon.
You know, and we
except
also
one thing.
Yes.
Except one thing. I don't think I could ever say to my friends, I bought a Suzuki Franks. It just sounds wrong.
sounds weird.
The name. Yeah.
Greg,
They should have called it the Bellino Cross.
Greg, what do you think is gonna happen? Oh, no, Toyota. That's Toyota's thing now. It's not a cross.
I know, that's why I said it, John.
So, Greg, what do you think is going to happen since the launch of the Polo Vivo? Let's just give VW the benefit of the doubt on this podcast. Let's just say they do price the Polo Vivo correctly, and we don't have much complaints of the pricing. Do you think that that's what will challenge Suzuki again and get VW that second position in terms of sales? Because there's no one that's going to touch Toyota.
No.
Yeah.
No, I do think that if they can bring it in at a good price, it looks good, they spec it decently, they could probably see the numbers increasing substantially and kind of taking over Suzuki where they need to. But it's going to be difficult. But on the other hand, like Alan said, there's a massive VW following. So if it's got a badge on it, someone's going to buy it regardless of how it looks. So, yeah, I don't think that they'll have a tough assignment on their hands to sell as many as possible.
Okay, but in my personal opinion, like I agree with what you're saying. If Suzuki wasn't going to launch anything else for the rest of the year, I'd definitely say, cool. VW will easily get that second position again. But if I'm not mistaken, Suzuki is supposed to launch
Well, I was
again.
about to say, when's new Swift coming?
Exactly. The
Yeah.
new Swift is
Yeah.
coming this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And now, cool, VW launches, and then a new Swift comes into play. So now VW needs to also look at the whole new Swift coming into play. Is it going to challenge them?
I think there's
and
a lot
pricing?
I think there's a lot of strategic launch time planning going on in the background now to see who's going to. I mean, VW is probably going to be first,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're first,
as you've said. So it's then up to Suzuki to decide when they do it and how they do it, because I think it'll make a massive difference, like you said.
Yeah, because we are due for a Swift in a while,
Yeah.
'cause we haven't seen a Swift.
Yeah, there hasn't. I mean, there was a facelift which is nearly 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So the current Swift has been around for quite a long time, and the new one is out overseas. We know that.
Yeah.
It's a question of how quickly we get it here. I wasn't sure about this year, so I'm interested to hear. I know they said there is something there are launches coming still this year.
So
when I spoke to them the other day.
It'd be interesting to see what those launches are, and
Yeah.
if that could obviously get them sales up and challenge VW.
But you know,
or
there's
protect
something.
themselves
Can
from
I
the
throw in just something else here? The Polo Vivo's locally manufactured.
Yes.
Okay. The Swifts are coming in from India, as we know. Now, if you look at the whole market, something like over 80% of cars in South Africa under 350,000 Rand are Indian built.
Saw that a couple of weeks back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're doing something in their factories that we can't get right. I'm sorry, I'm putting it very bluntly.
Yeah.
Because why can't we price our locally built cars better than we are? I'm throwing something here, I know.
It's a good
But
question.
yeah, so there is that factor to it. Look, where Suzuki are scoring, I mentioned the word economies of scale earlier, you remember?
Yes.
The whole Toyota tie-in. All they're doing is churning more cars out of those factories in India, which can only be good for a pricing point of view because of the fact that they're probably running double and triple shifts and who knows what they're running to produce the number of cars they've got to be doing now out of those two factories.
And then, then look at the popularity of the Francs,
Yeah?
and how they ran out of stock, and they were having stock issues.
Well,
and
Greg, I'm going to say something that may upset a few people, but Suzuki in particular are famous for launching a model and having a shortage from day one, a stock shortage.
so that's where I'm leading to now with
Yeah.
Swift. Are they going to encounter the same thing, or are they going to learn or have learned from Francs, make any differences because they know that Swift and Polo Vivo
Yeah.
are like that?
I think it's also a strategic move in some ways where you create the waiting list.
Build demand.
And you build demand that way. Okay, you can frustrate demand as well. But as I say, it seems to have been a policy of theirs over the last 5 years or so, where each car they've launched has been the same thing. So you say, have they learned? Well, I can
Clearly
give you
not.
3 or 4 examples that have been the same, they hadn't learned yet.
And the other problem there is if they do take too long to bring the car in, then Toyota goes and rebadges it, and it's the same thing.
Do you think Toyota's going to rebadge a Swift?
No, apparently, from what I've been told, there are 2 models that Suzuki have excluded from the agreement with Toyota.
Swift and a
The
box
Swift
and a boxy one.
and of course the little
Jimny.
the
Yeah.
Jimny. Apparently, those 2 are the words I've been told are never going to, but never is a strange word. But no, certainly not in the foreseeable future.
Those iconic ones. Yeah.
They're icons, same as Toyota have got 1 or 2 icons that they won't throw
Yeah.
the same way. So, yeah, however they've structured that agreement, apparently they've allowed for that.
Okay, makes sense. And you touched on pricing as well. And when you speak about pricing, it speaks on new vehicles and second-hand vehicles. And the amount of second-hand vehicles that are being bought every month in the country is a lot. And it's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing for new car sales, but it's a good thing for used car sales. What are your thoughts about that, Greg? I know the reason why second-hand vehicles are selling more, but for the audience that don't have the knowledge or they don't know why it's happening, why do you think that's happening?
I mean, I'd promote someone to buy a second-hand demo car over a new car any day. The obvious thing there is pricing, and you're going to get, as soon as you take it off the dealership floor, you're losing money, or it's already started to drop in value and things like that. But I mean, a second-hand car, a demo car has been driven in, the engine's nice and healthy, you've still got a motor plan, you've still got warranty, but those are the things the parameters that I would put into place for someone to say, why would you want me to get a second-hand car if I'm going to then start paying for parts and things like that? Well, the parameters are, get a second-hand car, but make sure that it's still covered by the warranty and everything, and it's still got a service plan and all of that, and you as good as gold compared to getting something new.
In your thoughts, Alan?
Yeah, I think you've got to differentiate here as well. The word second-hand or used, there are these different words. If you take up to 2 or at most 3 years old, or are you talking a 10-year-old car? Yeah, because they all fall under the same sales figures and categories. Now, that's two completely different ball games, okay? But the up to 2 odd years old, there's such a good case for buying a car in that category. Where, as you say, look, I mentioned earlier that your average is to lose 20% in your first year. So by the second year, you've lost about 30%. That's a lot of money on a 500,000 Rand car. That's 150,000 Rand. That's, 3,000 odd Rand a month on your payments.
And at something that's 3 years old, you're buying it that they're still selling a new version of it on the showroom floor. So you're getting something that's 3 years old that's significantly cheaper, but if you buy it, you can still see that they are selling a new version of it, and on the road you kind of look like you are still buying a new car.
Well, in today's world, you've got your, on average, 7-year model cycle, right? And generally speaking, midway you get a facelift or an update or whatever word you want to use. Go back years ago, there was a big thing: you don't buy the previous model.
The first
it was always whether it was the facelift or a new version. The theory and the thought was you lost a lot of money the minute there was a new version out. That I could see. You bought the old one. You cheapskate. That kind of thing. That's fallen away nowadays as well. It doesn't seem to be as important
because of the price of the vehicle.
And
cars get more expensive, but our salaries stay the same.
So sorry, salary? What's that word?
So
I haven't earned a salary since long before you were born. Okay.
A businessman in Alan Mr. Rosenmeyer here. So we're gonna speak about Alan, because clearly he's been alive for many, many, many years. We're going to speak about Alan and his journey in this motoring industry. Just touch on those things, what he's had, his challenges, and the main thing, his biggest highlight and what we do for a living. We're also going to speak about Greg and his lovely vehicle. I don't know if his car has a name yet. If it does, he'll tell us his name, and then we're going to wrap up the episode. But for now, let's take a word from our sponsors, because you guys want to know who our sponsors are.
Looking to buy a new or used car? Visit changecars.co.za.
And that is a word from our sponsors. Now, it's very interesting. The guests I've had, I kind of knew their story of how they started the whole car reviewing thing. But those special guests I have today, I know nothing. I don't know, did he wake up and decide I'm going to start car reviewing? Because I don't think that was his first job.
Best kept secret.
So we're going to touch on that, Alan. Please just briefly take us through, obviously, what you started, when you started working, what you started working with, and then moving on, if you did do something different, how you moved how you moved on to the car thing, and then I'll ask you questions as well.
I was born with a passion for cars. Let me just tell you that.
Okay.
Family legend says that at about 3 years old, if we were out on the road, I could tell you the make and model of every car that passed us.
Okay.
It's just always been in me. I can't explain why. But that's from the start. Work-wise, I started life trying to be an accountant.
Okay.
It didn't work. It didn't last. So let's just leave that aside. I was in retail management in large stores for a number of years.
Okay.
And then I got into the property industry and ran my own property company for nearly 20 years. Selling, and I managed body corporates.
Okay.
Which is where I lost all my hair. So that was my working history. In between, I did sell cars for 1 year along the way. So I had a little dabble in the motor industry there, which was just, again, a bit of fun and a bit interesting, but then went back to retail management for various reasons.
Okay.
This industry, is coming up for 11 years now.
Okay.
Where just before that, I got onto radio in a little town called Bredasdorp.
Where is that?
Have you heard of it, Greg?
Not at all.
Okay, Bredasdorp is just inland of Cape Agulhas. You must know Cape Agulhas.
Yes, I do.
Southernmost tip of Africa.
Yes.
200 k's out of Cape Town, which is where I lived most of my life.
Okay.
And I did the semi-retire thing and moved to Bredasdorp and ended up on the little community radio station, just by a series of little coincidences, and ended up presenting the breakfast show. 5 days a week. Heeltemal tweetalig. Afrikaans, Engels, didn't make any difference. I had to do the whole thing. And what was fascinating was I was not man alone in the studio. I was man alone in the building doing a breakfast show. So your presenter, producer, techie,
Sound guy, everything.
the whole lot, okay? Which was a lot of fun and incredible experience. Now, because I was producer, I had to come up with content. So one day I thought to myself, because of my passion for cars, I wonder if I can't do a little car thing once a week. And there were 2 dealerships in Bredasdorp, Ford and Toyota.
Okay.
So I walked into both of them and I said, if you gave me a car for a day or two to drive, I'll do a feature on the car, which they loved. So that was the start of it. Then life happened, which I'm not going to, that's not the point. I moved to Johannesburg almost 11 years ago. And my dream was to continue my career on radio. And I went to a radio station and did a voice test. And they said, fine, sounds good. Only thing is, every show of ours has got a presenter already. But we have open slots. So if we gave you a slot, what show would you do? And I said, motoring. So the guys questioned me for 2-3 minutes on cars and said, okay, you obviously know cars. So if we gave you an hour-long slot once a week on cars, what would you call the show? And I said, Motor Matters.
Okay.
It just popped in my head.
Yes.
And that was the birth of Motor Matters, which, you know, is my brand.
Yes, your brand, yes.
So I did the show on that station for about 2 years. I ended up also co-presenting the breakfast show on that station for most of that time as well. And then it's moved from there. And you know where I'm at now.
Yes, so when you started at the radio station,
Yeah.
that hour-long thing, so
Right.
because you had already had connections in where you were from, your Toyota and Ford, you'd get cars from there. Wasn't it challenging coming up here to Joburg? Where did you get the cars from for the content?
Begging and pleading, and fortunately the radio station had 1 or 2 contacts.
Okay.
Because I was new in Johannesburg, let alone trying to start something new. So I got 1 or 2 through that. And then, like lots of guys are starting nowadays, I got quite a few cars from dealerships.
Okay.
And I would just go to a dealership, and even if you got the car for 2 days, or overnight, or a weekend, or whatever it was, and I started like that. And then I was very fortunate. I was invited on 1 or 2 launches, where I don't even know how I got lucky, and I was. And I met up with some of the more established guys in the game. And the first and foremost thing I did was joining the guild, the SA Guild
SA
of
Guild,
Mobility Journalists, as it's now called.
Yes.
And that was a massive stepping stone. And you know I'm very involved with the guild to this day.
Please say your position at the guild.
Okay. I'm honored. I was voted onto the exco of the guild a month or 2 back. So my portfolio on the exco is membership and training.
Membership and training.
Yeah.
Guys, please, in the comment sections, clap hands for Mr. Alan Rosenmeyer. Please put those emojis.
No, you know what? It's also about giving back a little bit.
Yes.
Because first of all, I believe in that, and secondly, you made a horrible comment just now about being old, okay? But no, seriously, I'm at a point where I think it's nice to, if you can, give back. And experience is something that can never be bought.
100%.
So I want to do that. Also, I can tell you, and are either you guys members of the guild?
It's happening
No.
soon.
You better. I'll
It's
forward you.
happening. You have it. You heard it here first.
I'll forward you the app forms when we finished. Okay. Nikki, are you?
I am a member.
You're a member, right?
I am a
Okay.
member.
Really, it did so much for me in getting me established in the industry by being a guild member. So I'm convinced that anybody who wants to do this,
That's the way.
that's the way to do it.
And over the 11 years that
Yeah.
you've done this, what is your biggest highlight or proudest moment for yourself? Whether it's a certain car you've got,
Yeah.
it's a trip, I don't know, anything for you. Your personal achievement.
Wow. You know what? I'd like to say was getting onto the jury for Car of the Year,
Okay.
because that was actually a target of mine from day one.
No.
You know, I've looked, I told you, I've just had this built-in passion for cars. And Car Magazine, I started buying Car Magazine when I was about 13 years old. And there may have been a few gaps, but I've probably bought 90% of the issues over the years since then.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I haven't kept the collections. I wish I had. But I've always, and there would, I mean, way back then it was, I'd love to be a journalist on Car Magazine.
Yes.
Yeah, because that was the title. Things have changed because of social media, etc., etc. But still, I mean, they're a power and they've got to be recognized. So that was the one thing. Then I started following Car of the Year, which started in 1986. And it was always, you know what? The 25 jury members have to be 25 of the top people in this industry.
Yes.
I want to be there. That's my target. That's my aim. Come on. I don't care whether you're 10 years old or 100 years old. You always want to be at the top of your game,
100%.
whatever you're doing. So I wanted to get there. And that was a massive moment when I got voted onto jury. And secondly, now is getting onto the Exco.
Okay, that's some very good goals. I'm glad you've achieved them, personal
you.
achievements.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Rick.
So, guys, remember, clap hands for Alan Rosenmeyer.
Alan R.
Eleanor from Motor Matters.
Am I allowed to tell you where the Alan R comes from?
Where does it come from?
Okay. Two places.
Okay.
Firstly is Rosenmeyer is very long, and people always get it wrong. And like on radio, it's a bit clumsy.
Okay.
The second thing is it's a tribute to my late mother,
Okay.
who her entire working life was known as Mrs. R.
Oh, okay, makes sense.
So I've continued that.
Makes sense. Moving on to Mr. Gregory Dennis.
Yes, sir.
Gregory.
Let's speak about your car. It's a 1990 what?
1998.
1998. Tell us about your car.
So, for my sins, I bought myself a car. It's a 1998 BMW E36 328i. So it has a 6-cylinder, 2.8 liter, naturally aspirated engine, rear-wheel drive, and just oozes old school 90s BMW flair.
So with
The
what
manual or auto?
It's the auto.
auto. So with what we do for a living, literally we have a car almost every week. Why did you buy a vehicle? Because clearly you don't need a vehicle and you already have a vehicle.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I decided that I owned a car. I owned a 2010 Ford Focus 2-liter TDCi hatchback. Awesome. Game started to give me issues, and then I started to get more cars regularly. And I thought, okay, well, this is probably a good time to probably get rid of it because I don't need it. It's actually becoming a nuisance because it's taking up space in the driveway because of all the test cars. And we owned a second car as well. We had a Nissan X-Trail. So I decided to sell the car, no longer needed it anymore. And then now, like 2 years later, I got an itch. Because it's different. I missed owning a car. I missed having something to clean, to look after, to dabble with, to just fix and mess around with and just do things on. And I missed having a car. And just with my platforms, I thought, let me get a car. I can make some content on it. People always love fixer-upper videos, detail videos, things like that. So I decided to do it. I got the car also in partnership with All Things Motoring. So you'll see in all my videos, we chat about that. I think the alignment was just there with them too, because All Things Motoring just sits outside of regular car reviews. It's literally everything about all things motoring. So
yes, 100%.
You know, car shows, concourse events, all that sort of stuff. So for me, getting this car, the idea was to bring it back to its former glory. I wouldn't say concourse level, but the idea is to bring it back to its former glory, fix it up, put some new wheels on, give it the Greg Dennis Reviews touch, bit of OEM plus look to it, and that's it. We're 2 videos in at the moment on my channel, a lot more planned, and I'm looking forward to making some content on it.
Do you have a name for it?
Not yet. So
Guys,
we are working on that.
Guys, please go to Greg's channel, comment a name, give him a name, something. Give him a name for his vehicle.
Yeah.
So with me, I know you guys have been asking, when are you going to see the City Golf that I have? Guys, Please be patient. I have other things that I'm currently working on. But the car will be on the channel. We're in August now. You are going to see this in August. And I'm going to give you guys a time frame. End of September into October, there will be a big update with my personal car. And please be patient. For now, I'm redirecting you guys. You see, when you think about watching my City Golf and you can't watch it, please, guys, please go watch Greg Dennis
Here we go.
and Mr. Alan R for content. In the meantime, then you'll come back to me when I've posted the City Golf. Please be patient. And actually, speaking about cars, Alan, have you owned any vehicles?
I've owned plenty of vehicles.
Just touch on that as well.
Wow.
Or your most just touch on which ones you've owned and your most favorite.
Okay. My most favorite and the biggest regret I ever have not having it anymore was the original 1979 Escort 1600 Sport.
Okay.
I don't know if that...
Very cool.
Yeah, I know it.
Okay. And mine was very rare metallic gold.
Okay.
It was the car. And unfortunately, I didn't keep it because those things are worth a fortune today. So that was one that I really owned for about 2-3 years. Got it brand new.
Okay.
Back then, 4,500 Rand bought you a brand new Escort 1600 Sport.
Now you'll pay a 1 month installment for that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that just shows what. So that was one of the cars. The last car I actually owned was also, I was very proud of the fact, Mercedes A-Class, the A180 diesel,
Okay.
the second shape A-Class, which I bought brand new out of the box.
Okay.
So I was very proud of the fact I got to a point in life where I could go and buy a new Mercedes.
Yes, yes.
Kept it for a long time. Gave it to my daughter when she got her license because same story. Didn't need the car.
Okay.
It just literally was standing around too much of the time. And she got her license, needed a car to go to varsity. Why must we run 3 cars in the family when we don't need them? So,
Okay.
and I've owned quite a few in between. My biggest regret, which I never bought, was I was offered, not long after getting the 1600 Sport, I was offered an old Porsche 912. You know the 912?
Nope.
Okay. 911 body
Okay.
with a VW 1600 twin port motor. So it was the entry Porsche, if you want to call it that.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Okay. This car was a left-hand drive, brought in via who knows where. It was old at the time, and I was offered this car for the incredible, massive amount of money of 4,000 Rand.
Imagine
And
that car
I
now.
just bought the 1600 Sport brand new. And it was like, I don't want to be horrible, but my late mother said, you can't take a brand new car and spend the same money on a 15-year-old car. There's a regret for you.
Could have been sitting on 2 gems.
Yeah. Yeah, I can you imagine the ideal world if I still had both of those?
Oh, the amount of money you'd be sitting on.
I mean, you wouldn't be here. You'd probably be on a beach somewhere.
No, I would be here. I love what I do. I can't help it.
All right, guys. Thank you for watching this wonderful podcast brought to you by Change Cars and All Things Motoring. I've been lovely to have you guys in studio. Thank you guys for coming. We're in August. Remember, we said we're coming back here in November. So we're going to be right here in November to speak about those Chinese and the Suzukis and all those things. Thank you, Mr. Alan R, for joining us in studio.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Greg Dennis.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Greg, you know how we do it this side, right?
I do.
You know.
I do.
Guys, thank you for watching. I'm Nikki Nash, your host with the most from Sucha, South Africa. This is the Keep It Or CHANGECARS podcast brought to you by All Things Motoring and Change Cars. I'm signing out.